What's up everyone, welcome back here at the Neon Pavilion. My name is Niklas and we're getting dangerously close now to the beginning of the first rehearsal week. The stage has been built, everything is ready and set for the artists to arrive for the Eurovision 2023 in Liverpool. And the stage, like I just mentioned, that is actually going to be the focus of today's video because I realized that I had promised a video reacting to the stage design when it was released, but I never actually made that video. I just didn't have the time to do it. But now that we have the stage actually being built, so it's not just renders we're looking at, but we have the actual stage, I thought, what better time to actually take a little look at it and talk about it, because I do have a few things to say. I feel like I don't necessarily have as much to say as I've had with previous year's designs, but I do have a little bit to say at least. Now, I think before we get into it, I just want to kind of give like my take on what do I think has been some of my favorite stages in recent years when it comes to the Eurovision Song Contest. I think, of course, when you think of great stages, you have to mention the one in Copenhagen, and that's not just because I'm Danish, but I really liked that it was something a little different, and I liked how the light panels could be used, the glass panels in the back, so you could have it both open, but you could also just use it as like normal LEDs. I thought it was a really clever way of doing it. I really like that. But something that may be a little bit more controversial, or whatever you want to say, is that I actually really enjoyed the stage in Vienna as well. I know a lot of people didn't like that one, felt like it was too small, and that's an interesting thing because we are going to get back to that, talking about this year's stage. But I like the fact that it was a little smaller. I like that it was a little bit more intimate. And I think looking back at a lot of the performances that we had there in 2015, they don't really, like, no artist feel lost on that stage because it isn't too big. One thing that I never really enjoy with stages is that if they are too grand, too big, sometimes the performers can look like little ants, and especially if you are just performing alone or you just have a couple dancers maybe, you can easily get lost on a big stage. It happened in Copenhagen as well, even though I really do enjoy that stage, but sometimes you have to do some things to make sure that the stage doesn't feel too big, because if it feels too big, at least in my opinion, it looks a little silly. But I think honestly a lot of my favorite stages, we do have to go a few years back. I like some of the things we had, for example, in 2003 and 2004, because in my opinion, there was just a little bit more personality back then. LEDs was still being introduced as like this new thing in a modern Eurovision, but it wasn't just the norm. I like when countries experiment a little bit more and isn't just LED and that's all you get. That's another reason why I do actually really enjoy the Lisbon stage as well. I like that it was something different and we didn't have those LEDs. But that's just a little bit about my personal taste. I thought that was good to get out of the way because it may mean that some of the opinions that I have on this year's stage may make a little bit more sense. I guess? I don't know, we'll figure it out. Because I think there are definitely both pros and cons to the stage. I do think it's nice to have something else in renders now. We've actually seen it in person, and I think what we've seen from that little clip where the King of the United Kingdom actually revealed the stage, I think it does look good on camera, and I think that's such an important thing, you know? This is a TV show after all. Yes, it's a big live event, but it is first and foremost a TV show, so it has to look good with the camera angles. And I know we've only seen a tiny bit of it so far, but I think what we have seen so far looks pretty good. The stage this year isn't necessarily too flashy and too unique, but I think that might be a good thing. You know, we saw last year where the Italian broadcaster really tried to do something that was different than what we had seen in recent years. Some of it worked. I loved the flowing water on the stage. I thought it looked absolutely beautiful. I also love the idea. I know that isn't necessarily about the stage, but I do love how they had those like plants in the green room. I thought it looked really unique, and I think it fit very well with the vibe and the graphics that we had last year. But of course, no one can deny that the broken kinetic sun last year was a huge issue, and I do think a lot of broadcasters really complained about this because they had to change a lot of their staging last minute because of this. And I think both the EBU, but especially also the BBC, they took note of that and was like, okay, we need to play it a little bit more safe this year because we need delegations to be happy with what they have this year. So going with something that you know works, I think is absolutely the smartest thing to do. And I think they've done that this year while still having some elements in there that are interesting, that are something different, and that will be interested to see how it works. What I'm mainly talking about here, of course, is the moving LED walls on the back. I know that everyone kind of freaked out when it said in the print that it was going to be moving LED walls because people were thinking about the kinetic sun. But this isn't necessarily a new thing. If you go back to both Rotterdam and to Tel Aviv, we did actually have moving LED panels. And you will notice in some of the performances, you will have more light rigs, then you will have LED. And of course, there is the big opening of Måneskin's performance in 2021. That, of course, have that where the camera goes through the LED wall. So we've had it before. There isn't necessarily anything new about it, but it is a good way to get more variety into the show because it means that you can play a little bit around with how you want it to look. If you want something that's a little bit more intimate, maybe you can remove LEDs kind of altogether and have some more lights pointing at the performer. But of course, you can also have that like big open, just LED full of color, show everything. I think it's a good way of letting broadcasters get the opportunity to pick the kind of vibe they want for their performance. And I think something like these kind of moving walls is something that we're going to see a lot more of moving forward in the next couple of years as well. Julio Jiménez is the name of the designer that has made the stage this year. And can I just say, I think it's wonderful that we have a new stage designer this year. Nothing against Florian Weder. I think he is fantastic at what he does, but I think having the same stage designer do it every single year, like I feel like we've seen for a good bit of the 2010s, he did a lot of stages back then. I feel like you can only do so much when you are a certain designer with a certain style, and there's nothing wrong with that. As a designer, of course, you have your own unique style you want to go for, but having the same every single year, it does get a little boring. And I feel like a lot of the Eurovision stages we've had in recent years, they have shared a lot of similarities. So having something that feels very different this year, because it very much does, I think that is really cool. Usually I like to say, it's best to have like a local person doing it. I mean, in this part of my recording, I ended up rambling a lot and I don't think it made a lot of sense. So I'm just quickly gonna go in here with a little edit. What I wanted to say here when it comes to having a local person doing it, I basically mean in countries, something like in the Netherlands or something like in Israel, where stage designers or people working with this may only usually work on local productions and never actually get the chance to do something that's being shown international. There, I feel like it makes a lot of sense to get someone local. When we're in the United Kingdom, I can imagine that a lot of those people working with stage design, they are able to do international shows, both in the United Kingdom, but also in America and other places. So going a different route this year and choosing someone who is world-renowned, who's done a lot of European and American shows, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And thumbs up for having someone who hasn't done it before in Eurovision, so they bring in something different. Julio, he has previously worked on shows like the MTV Europe Music Awards, and you can definitely tell when you look at this stage. And I think that's one of the parts where I do get a little negative, because when I think of something like the European Music Awards, I don't often think of those stages. I feel like they are often not very memorable and they are built for a different purpose. Oftentimes when you see those kinds of award shows, you sometimes, especially in recent years, we've seen that where you kind of have to have two stages because everything has to go so quickly. So you have one stage in one end and one stage in the other end, and you have to be able to flick through these. It's a different kind of show. It's a different kind of production. And I don't think like the set design is that prioritized in those kinds of shows because it is a different thing. Where one of the things that I've always loved about the Eurovision Song Contest is that the stage design seems to be a big part of it every single year. You want to convey a certain message with your stage. It's one of those things that you can really do it grand if you want to. And I don't necessarily feel like the stage this year is so grand and so interesting. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because I don't think this is going to be a stage that will be remembered for years to come. I think he's a talented designer, don't get me wrong, but I think this just fits a different kind of show. I think it is interesting that something that I've seen a lot of people bring up is that this feels a little bit like a national final stage. And I don't really blame them, because if you look at something like Benidorm Fest, for example, this has a lot of the same vibe as the stage that they had. I think it's the stage last year, actually. This year was a little bit different, but the stage they had last year, it has a lot of the same elements as this. I'm someone who thinks that stages become a lot more fun when you have different little elements in it that kind of stands out, that pops out. I think that's one of the reasons why I love the 2015 stage, for example, because that is, you have all those lights around it, and it's very characteristic. There's nothing that's really super characteristic about this stage. It feels very much LED centered, and I'm not a big fan of that. I'm also not a huge fan of square stages, and I think it is, like I've already mentioned, that the bigger a stage is, it's easier for people to be swallowed up. And square stages, that very often happens, and we've seen it in shows before where you have that little bit more theater style stage, which I feel like this definitely is, that if you don't utilize the stage properly, and if you aren't able to use the stage properly, you're gonna get a lot of blank space to both sides that just feels a little awkward. Because obviously you want the performer and everything happen. You kind of want that centered in the middle, but that means that there's a lot of wasted space where if you have something like a round stage, for example, it looks more natural to have the performance like in the middle of the round stage, and there isn't that much blank space around it. And then of course, once you get outside of the stage, then you're able to place audience or place cameras or place lighting rigs, which means that that blank space doesn't feel too huge. I think Eurovision 2001 in Parken in Copenhagen is a great example of when a stage can get too wide because there is a lot of space there that isn't being utilized, and I think they just weren't able to with the way that the cameras were rigged up. We've come a long way since then, that's for sure. So hopefully it won't be that much of an issue this year, but I can't imagine that most acts will actually be able to utilize all the stage, which just means that it's gonna look a little too big. And some people may really disagree with me on this, because I've seen a lot of people saying that this stage looks too small, which I think is very interesting, because I almost feel like it looks too big. But I guess it all depends on perspective, and it's definitely hard to say how this will be utilized. This is all speculation from my side, of course. Once the rehearsals really get going and we actually start to see the stage being used in action, maybe my thoughts will change completely. We'll just have to wait and see. Another thing I want to touch upon is the little satellite stage there in the middle. I'm usually not a big fan of catwalks. I think they look a little dumb sometimes, and it means that the performers are not getting that close to the audience. I feel like this year may be one of those as well. We don't know how many acts will actually be out there on the round stage. I hope that a lot of performers will utilize that round stage and almost do their entire performance on that, because I think that can eliminate a lot of what I've just mentioned. But we do have a lot of bands this year, so I can imagine that a lot of them, to be able to fit everyone on stage, will be using that backstage more. It'll be interesting to see how that really works, because I think the good thing about the satellite stage and the little catwalk this year is that it isn't too long, so you're not gonna get that bit because we've seen that before where, towards the end of your performance, you want to go out, you want to be closer to the audience, so you walk out to the satellite stage. If the walk there is very long, you're gonna get almost 30 seconds of the performers where you're just running and walking. You just you want to get to that satellite stage so fast, but you have to keep singing, you have to keep doing your performance. I don't think it always looks that good. So having a little bit of a shorter way to the satellite stage this year, that might actually be a positive thing. And I do like that it's in the middle and it all feels like a thing that's it's like a unified stage. I guess that's the best thing that I can put it, because sometimes when you have that satellite stage, it just feels like you have this catwalk that just goes all the way around, so you get it out here and it looks strange sometimes. This year, everything on the stage feels very connected. And if you look at the lighting rig on top as well, you see that that is actually pretty much centered over the round stage. And I think that's a very smart move because it means that instead of it feeling like a separate satellite stage, all of it feels part of the main stage. And hopefully it also means we can get some interesting camera shots where the camera can kind of like follow the artist all the way around. I do hope some will utilize that. And I did briefly mention it there, but the lighting rig. We have a big lighting rig at the top, but we also have the light rails on the side where we have those like curvy bits. The curvy bits are fine. I don't think they're necessarily so important, but I do like that they've put those lights all around it because I can imagine when we get those big wide shots, that can be used to an advantage and kind of like, you know, you can take the colors from the performance and really get it out there. It definitely looks like we have another big and impressive lighting rig. I think that's one of the things that's improved the most over the past couple of years in Eurovision. That has been the lighting. Of course, a lot of countries had to use it last year, had to get really creative with it because of the kinetic sun. But personally, again, this is probably a very personal opinion, but I think lighting rigs and doing good lighting, I think that's so much cooler than just smacking something up on an LED. I think Czech Republic last year is a great example of how you can really do lighting to really make it look spectacular. And I do hope some delegations have learned some lessons of how important these lighting rigs can be last year, and they are taking it and have really worked with it this year. So we're gonna get some grand lighting that can really light up the whole arena, because I think the tech is definitely there to do it really grand this year. So all in all, I do think there are some positives and I do think there are some negatives. This isn't one of my favorite stages ever, but seeing it in action, I think made me a little bit more positive about it than I was when I first saw the renders, because I gotta be honest, when I first saw it, I just thought it was a little bit too boring. But seeing it with all the lights on and actually like seeing it with a little bit of a camera movement, I do have a little bit more hope for it. And of course, I do also think having a standing audience back this year and having people all around that like satellite stage with flags, just having a great time, I do think it's gonna make it feel bigger, because I know that's been one of the main complaints this year, is that the Liverpool arena is very small. But I think compared to something like Austria, if we want to go back to that, where yes, everything felt very small. You know, you look at some of the wide shots there and you feel like this is a tiny arena. I think this arena is about the same size as the Wiener Stadthalle, but looking at some of the shots that we did get to see in that video with the King, I do feel like we don't have that. Obviously, technology has also come a long way since 2015. I think being able to use wide-angle lenses is something that's just used a little bit more now than maybe it was back then, or maybe it was just like the Austrian broadcast and not really knowing how to do that. But I feel like what we've seen so far, they've really been able to utilize the space as much as possible, and they've been able to create the stage and create the look around it in such a way that it doesn't feel small, that it actually feels bigger than it may necessarily be. And the use of the curves, the use of having the stage so wide and having a lot of black space, I guess you can call it, just makes it feel bigger. And I think that's definitely a smart way and a good way to go about it. But of course, we can stand here and talk a lot about what do we think the stage is going to look like. Do we think it's a good or a bad stage? But at the end of the day, it all comes down to if the performers are able to utilize it. So it'll be interesting to see in the rehearsals what kind of ways that the delegations have been utilizing this stage, have been working on utilizing this stage. And we'll probably also see some elements of the stage that we haven't seen yet. I'm definitely very excited to see it. But those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the Neon Pavilion and turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. And then I'll hopefully see you guys for awesome rehearsal content coming next week when we begin the road to Liverpool 2023. Have a good one. I'll see you guys very soon.